Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, loin streamer, and award-winning satirist now. And today we're going to be talking about a subject that was requested by viewers, and that is how rape has been, my experiences with rape portrayed in stories. Now, it's a hot topic, a hot button topic, and everybody has their own preferences for what they like to see, what they don't like to see. I'm here to say that there is no right or wrong, probably, in this case, except all opinions are incorrect anyway. And everything that I'm about to say in this video is based on experience, observation, specific books that I've read, and also stuff that I have written in my own books, which I will share how I have used this topic in my own books. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the links down in the description below. Number one, Fort Lamoy, where it is the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story, submit it, or an episodic, and we just bask in everybody's greatness in the first Monday of the month. The second way is if you are an indie author and you would like your first chapter read on this channel to be spread to the viewers who hopefully are looking for something creative that is delicious and tasty, they'll find you here. So that is the hope. And then number three, if you would like to check out any of my books and read or roast them, they are all linked down in the description below, and you can get them at any of your favorite retailers. With that said, let's jump into the topic. So, disclaimer before we get started. I know I already did a disclaimer, but another disclaimer before we get started. Number one, everything that I always say is just opinion, observation, experience. Not saying anything about anyone who's got a difference of it, and I also accept that I have some interesting experiences with different things. So there's that. Number two, if this is a topic that is sensitive to you, I would be careful with entering the video because it's going to be talked about pretty nonchalantly here, because we're talking about it in the case of storytelling. And number three is, if you've got your own preferences, likes, dislikes, whatever, no harm, no foul. If you like the rape fantasy stories, no harm, no foul. If you despise rape in books for any reason whatsoever, no harm, no foul. There are so many books out there that we can all enjoy or despise whatever it is we want to. Now, for me, when it comes to pretty much anything in books, I judge them on a case-by-case basis of whether the author did well or not in the depiction of what it is they were trying to do or the effectiveness of what they were trying to do. And that is also insanely subjective because things that I like, other people might not like, and vice versa. So all of my judgments are going to be based on my preferences and my observations of the stories in which I am talking about them, and then how I attempt to use these things or write these things in my stories. And I would love to hear your experiences with any of those. So the first thing that I want to say before getting into some specific examples is that there is actually, as far as I've been aware, some pretty big controversy in using rape in stories within the writing community and the literary community at large. For the last couple of years, when I've been looking at book submissions and even short story submissions, literary magazine submissions, a lot of them specifically with agents and with literary magazines will say no rape or sexual assault or allusions to sexual assaults within the stories. A lot of people do not want it anywhere near their fiction. They may be struggling personally with it, and it just may don't do it. I've also seen a lot of trope videos or things that need to stop being done videos that talk specifically about raping the female character and using either the rape as her motivation or a male character's motivation, and a lot of people just seem to not like it. And I want to reiterate here that somebody not liking it and saying, hey, I would like to see less of this trope is, again, a personal preference, and there are a lot of people out there that kind of push personal preferences or personal tastes in favorite tropes or least favorite tropes and act like they are rules. So if you have rape in your story, it's all a personal choice. You can do whatever you want to do to tell the story that you want to tell. But also, no, I think that there is a current literary landscape that will work against you, but the literary landscape is not the same as the readership landscape. The literary side is like the business side and the people that are choosing what to publish, but it is also not the same as the reader side, because readers are actually looking for something different than industry is looking for, based on my observations. So there's that. And I think that's the main thing that I want to say before getting into now for the portrayal of rape in stories. I think that we need to establish there are specifically two very different ways in which the portrayal can take place. And one of those portrayals is as something super traumatic that is either character building or character destroying. It is often used as a dramatic wedge somehow. And then there is the sexualized version of rape, which is very, very common. One of the most popular, I think it's one of the most popular fantasies among women is the rape fantasy, or forced sex or humiliation sex. And you see it in a lot of romance books. I don't make the rules. I don't make the tropes or the smut choices, but you can find a lot of forced sex in romance and erotica, and especially, how do I say this? It's also very common in just Japanese storytelling. There's a lot of forced that can there's a lot of force that can show up in that storytelling that then contributes to the romance eventually. So in talking about rape, we need to recognize that there is the use of it in a dramatic sense, and there is also the use of it in a romance setting or a fantasy erotica setting. And these are two very different camps and two very different sets of people and two very different sets of motivations and consequences for the actions. And especially if you personally have negative feelings towards rape because you went through something very traumatic yourself, you may not like rape in your stories, or you may have like embraced it as a way of coping. It's whatever. But I think this is also where some of the big controversy comes from in the sexualization and the fetishization of force or rape, and the trauma of it all. Rape is also often used as, if it's not in a romantic partner that is going to be in a dark romance, it is also often used as an extra thing to an extra like crime to add on to somebody, or an extra bad thing to add on to somebody who is supposed to be a bad guy. I can't tell you how many books I've read, specifically like sci-fi fantasy, where the bad guy is like every evil thing conceivable. You've got like, oh, he's a pedophile, he's a murderer, he's a rapist, he wants to rape the female main character just because let's pile on all the bad things that we can, and there's no nuance to it whatsoever. So it's just kind of one of those things that also gets clipped onto things to add this feeling of either evil to justify the main character doing something to that bad guy, or to put the main character in more danger. So I have a couple stories here. Actually, I think all of these are indie, except for Lolita. So I have a couple examples, recent examples of books I've read that have rape in them and the different ways that they use. And I want to talk over the different ways in which rape was used in these stories. So the first one is His Name Was Augustine. Now, if you've been around my channel, you'll know that I have done 2 book reviews for the first and second book of that 6-book series, and I did a series roundup for that book. So go ahead and check that out. And also, if you are daring enough to go and read it, please do, because I need people to talk to about this book. I was traumatized after almost 1 million words. In the first His Name Was Augustine book, we are given an anal rape when Swanee goes to college. Now, it is just by a bunch of random guys, and I don't know if the author has changed anything in this book, because she was updating the book sometimes as she went through the publishing process for this book. But in this book, the character just opens the door to her dorm and sees a bunch of guys in there and kind of just stands there dumbly until she's pulled into the room, and then she's anally raped. The only reason that she was anally raped, as far as I could tell, was so that she could maintain her vaginal virginity to give to her actual love interest later. Like, logically, from a written perspective, that is why that was done. It did give reasons within the book as to why she was anally raped instead of otherwise, but it also doesn't make any sense. We're gonna get a bit graphic here for a second, so because I feel like I need to describe just how this didn't work. So this is your warning that this is about to get mildly graphic. Probably very graphic, actually, in talking about this. But Swanee was anally raped by this guy. So there were like 4 of them, and only one of them anally raped her. The other guys were just like helping or something. And I don't even remember if they also forced themselves into her throat. They all didn't get a turn. It was just the one got off and then they left. I don't really understand. But they anally raped her because she was on her period, and they were disgusted by that, but they weren't disgusted by a possible dipstick. So, okay. But so as far as I can recall, and I don't remember where I heard this, if I read this somewhere, if it was in a conversation with the author, but I recall the author saying that this rape was inserted into the story specifically so that people did not mistake this series as being YA. Because in the first book, Swanee is 18, 19, 20. She starts out 13, and then she goes to like 18, 19, 20 before the end of the book. I think I remember the author saying somewhere that she inserted the rape in there, not for any plot purposes, but to try to make sure that the book was not considered YA. Now, take that as you will, as me trying to remember, because I can't exactly point you to where that was. And then in book 2, we are introduced to the love interest, who is Augustine. Every time I reference him, I accidentally say Augustine because I live in Florida and I'm used to saying Augustine. But we're introduced to Augustine, and he is a demon-possessed dark priest who rapes women, animals, and children and sacrifices them to the demon god whom he gets his power from. Oh, and we see Augustine raping a woman. We get to experience Swanee walking up on Augustine as he's raping a woman in the bushes. But then Swanee is like, it's totally okay because she is a freaking Teuton. And Swanee is like, it's okay because she's a freaking Saxon and I hate Saxons. And generally, Augustine sacrifices Saxons to the demon guy. And then in book 3, Swanee goes to see Augustine after she's been married for 10 years. And because she's still in love with Augustine, has been cheating with Augustine for 10 years. Well, she's been married to Joel the whole time, you know, leading Joel on, letting Joel take care of the house and the finances and her children. But I digress. She goes to meet Augustine in her best friend's hometown. And then Augustine is possessed by the demon, who then rapes her multiple times, basically fills her with his demon seed multiple times over, kicks her until she has a miscarriage, breaks her toes. All of this terrible stuff goes down. So then that book has rape all over the place in it. We're also, it's kind of casual rape, but it's also kind of just casual not rape because she agrees to it. But in book 4, I think it was book 4, the main character's cousin, Beth, wants to get Teutonic powers. And there are 2 ways to get Teutonic powers. One is through a blood transfer, a magical blood transfer with another Teuton, and that's very dangerous. Or you can have anal sex with a Teuton until your blood quantum is raised high enough that you develop Teutonic powers. So cousin Beth goes to a dark priest in the modern era, gets put under anesthesia for 2 weeks, and then just has anal sex while under anesthesia for 2 weeks. Now, I don't know if you would consider that rape because she agreed to it. She just didn't want to be conscious for it. But, so you've got those instances in this series. And this is a romance series. And everything that is done with Augustine is kind of to show, like, how terrible he is. But you're also supposed to eventually grant him forgiveness because Swanee grants him forgiveness, but she's not going to grant Joel forgiveness. Just forget about that. So this is really meant to look like a terrible thing in this book that he is supposed to recover from, but we never really actually approach what the issue is with the rape. Like, there's no discussion with Augustine about his previous actions. It's just Swanee constantly telling him that it is okay and he is forgiven and that God loves him anyway. So, not very well done rape. Rape that was done for traumatic purposes, but also rape that was done by the main love interest. Another story that used rape in a traumatic sense was Threadbare by E.L. Ayer. And I also have a review of that book on this channel, as well as the 2 books following that, which, oh my gosh, this still pisses me off to this day. I am sorry if I launch into a rant about this, but so at the end of Threadbare is about a soldier cyborg woman and her empath lover. And at the end of Threadbare, the cyborg soldier is kidnapped, and the bad guy that has her just decides to like rape her for no apparent reason. It's just like opportunity, and he just pulls her out of the room that all of her buddies were in because the main character was also in a troop with her soldier buddies. But they were left in there, and she was pulled out so that the bad guy could just rape her. And one, this felt fetishy. Two, it just felt like it was something that was put on top of the bad guy in order to traumatize the main character and also give the main character like an I spit on your grave style response. But one of the things that really bothered me with the representation or the display of rape in this story is, one, it was totally unnecessary because she was already totally traumatized. It didn't need to be added into this. Two, after the rape, like her shirt was torn and everything, and she's got these two guys on her team because she's the two guys and then her empath buddy and then her, and they're a troop of four. And the two guys, even though they are like buddy with her, they see her walking through the room with her shirt torn open, and it still felt the need to say that they were like staring at her tits, like she was post-rape, and these guys were still checking her out because this book had an obsession with making every single guy sleazy. Even the main character's friends were sleazy because they were men. The women were not. Her lover was not because her lover is a woman, but that was not. So you had this at the end, and then this rape actually contributed nothing to the final dramatic arc of the rest of the story, because this chick then goes to court, and there's this whole hearing about whether this character is considered human or robot because she's part cyborg, and the rape has nothing to do with it. The rape isn't reflected on in the court hearing in any emotional fashion to be like, look, she is human, she had an emotional response to this, so she should be recognized as human. She didn't disassociate to then be looked at like less of a human because, oh, look, she just compartmentalized her trauma, and so then making that more complicated. It was just totally dropped out at the end of this book. It happened to make the bad guy look worse and then disappeared. But then you get into the second book. This is where the rant comes in. You get into the second book, and the lover is talking, the empath lover is talking to her old teacher from college because she's like a therapist. And it's like, so my lover was raped in the last book, and now she has trouble being intimate. What do I do? And so you have that at the beginning of this book. However, then you go 200, 300 pages where there is no mention of the rape, no behavioral changes because of the rape in that soldier character. It is all just like awkward rom-com of weird, socially awkward soldier meeting this bubbly empath girl's family and friends from childhood because they're going away to do that. And then you get to the end of the book where, oh, suddenly we're going to mention the rape again, but only because the rape has now just been erased from her thoughts by a supercomputer, so now she will not be traumatized by it, and now you are magically healed. Like, oh my gosh, I hated it. It was magical healing. It was never used, and then it was just brought up and then dropped in order to just keep the characters from having sex at the beginning of the book. And oh my gosh, the cheapness of using stuff like that. And then the cheapness of healing something that wasn't even used in the story. Look, if you're going to include it, make it matter. Otherwise, don't put rape in your book. That is my belief. The next book that I want to mention is Flames of Lethe. I have a book review of that on this channel. And so the main character of this book wakes up in a desert with this other guy, or with this guy. They're both naked, and they're wandering forever. It turns out they're in hell. And they go through this whole journey where eventually she remembers who that naked guy is, and that naked guy was somebody that anally raped her. I feel like we're going through some similarities here. But so that guy anally raped her on the same night that Big Dick Adam was going to propose to her, or did propose to her. She turned Big Dick Adam down for the proposal because she was traumatized, very clearly. Then Adam, because he was upset that he was turned down, we find out he got super drunk that night, and then he drove home, and then he died in a car accident. And then when the main character found out, finally went back to work because she was traumatized by the rape, she found out that Adam died in a car accident. So then she took a knife or a pair of scissors, I don't remember what it was, I don't think it really matters, to stab the guy that anally raped her because he was a coworker, and then killed herself. And that's how they ended up in hell together. Well, at the end of this story, we learn actually all of that, because you don't get any flashbacks until suddenly it's like the entire end of, like, last 1/4 of the book is flashback scenes to explain their relationships. And yeah, you get basically they woke up from a dream and they got to relive that night where the guy anally raped her, and then they made a different decision, and then she welcomed him into their threesome, into a threesome polyamorous relationship, because he didn't rape her that night, because they remembered what happened, what all happened, and what hell they went through. And I don't have a lot to say on that story other than it was very clumsily put together. The rape didn't need to happen. I didn't really understand, again, why we have a random anal rape, and then again, random forgiveness of the anal rape, where it's not even dealt with in the journey of the story. Now, if you're going to do that, I know some people are like, if there is rape involved, no forgiveness, no redemption whatsoever. Obviously, it is a very common thing to forgive your rapist. We've got 2 right here that are into that, and you know, whatever floats your boat. But my recommendation is, if you are going to try to do that journey, let there be exploration of how person X hurt person Y, and actually go through the healing process instead of ignoring it, throwing it on you, and then being like, and all is forgiven, because that's cheap to me. Now, it's been a while since I've read Lolita, and I don't remember it quite as well, but that was actually a good representation of rape. But it was also a different sort of rape, because it was from the perspective of the rapist. That's the word that I wanted. And so he changed how we saw his victim by describing her how he wanted us to see her, like if she was whiny or if she was impudent or all of that. And so if he didn't want us to see her as much of a victim of his as she really was, then he got to use the words to do that. And that was actually a very interesting way to approach raping a teenager. You also saw a similar thing in Heather by G.C. McKay, who is a YouTuber, where he wrote a story from the perspective of a pedophile going after a 14-year-old girl, and again, blaming the 14-year-old girl for seducing him, and as if she had more self-control or more conscience than he did, and more responsibility in that relationship than he did. But he is also an unreliable narrator. Then the last story that I wanted to mention for stuff that I've read recently that used rape in it was Among the Hunted, and that was a story using Greek gods and goddesses and nymphs, nymph mythology. And the main character fell for, like, was it Hermes? I think it was she fell for Hermes, and was eventually set up in order to be raped, because these Greek gods got power by having sex with the nymphs, and they often forced the nymphs and then, like, drained them of their life force through forced sex. And the main character was constantly put under threat of being raped by a couple different Greek gods, but she was never actually raped. At the beginning of the book, you have her and her best friend who are tricked into a double date after the main character falls in love with Hermes. I think it was Hermes. Forgive me if it's not. But after she falls in love with this Greek god, and so the two of them go to meet these guys, and the best friend gets raped and murdered, but she gets away. Then throughout the story, 2 to 3 to maybe 4 more times, she runs into these situations where she is almost raped, and then she is saved at the last minute. And it is used as a cheap, like, shock to me when it gets done so many times, just to put the character under pressure of, like, a bad thing happening, but the book and the author won't commit to actually making that bad thing happen, so then you know that there's no teeth. Like, once, okay, twice, fine. After 2 times of escaping a certain situation, you're like, okay, this is not going to happen. This character is never in any actual danger because the author is protecting the character. And so when rape is inserted into a plot like that in order to do cheap shots for shock or tension, again, it just reads shallow. And then there's little consequence that comes out in the character, because the character knows that they're never in any danger by the author. So they're never going to act as desperately because they're never actually in any danger. So those were all dramatic. Oh, and if you want to know the full thing behind Among the Hunted, I also have a book analysis of that on this channel. So those were all more serious takes on rape. One thing that I will mention, because I mentioned the more sexy kind on this channel, you have a lot of situations that are often like mafia or a rich guy purchases poor girl and then forces them into sex slavery, basically, until they fall in love. That is a very common trope among erotica. And if you look at the backlog on this channel, I played a visual novel called Sweet Pool, and it was a yaoi visual novel, and rape is used in there in a romantic sense, where the main love interest, that actually is the one that gets the happiest ending, rapes the main character. And it's not the same as in like Threadbare or His Name Was Augustine, where there's actual like violence involved. This is just like a character being pushed against a wall saying no, and then as the character is saying no, they're like, oh, but why do I like this? Oh, I like this. And then it's over, and then it turns into eventually they get affection for that character, and that's very common from what I've seen in specifically Japanese literature and rom-com or romantic drama literature. And that's all I can really say on it, is because it's a different sort of crowd. So if you're talking about the traumatic rape and then the romantic rape that turns into a relationship and it's not seen as traumatic, it's just an awkward thing to discuss. It's basically foreplay. And if you haven't experienced that in stories, then it's kind of weird and hard to describe. You kind of just have to go and look at it. And I've read enough Japanese literature to see that trope play out a number of times. So that's all that I'm going to say on that, because there's no explaining it if you're not used to seeing it. But yeah. So those are a couple of different representations of rape in stories that I have seen printed recently, or, you know, Lolita is a classic. And clearly not a lot of great not a lot of great examples, and clearly I was not a fan of the way that they were written out, and I gave reasons as to why. You can go and watch the more full reviews of those books if you want more exact discussions on those individual situations. In my own stories, nothing that I have published right now actually has any rape in it, but I have 4 stories that I can think of off the top of my head that do involve rape to some extent, and they all involve male victims. I think they all involve male. 2 of them involve male victims with female perpetrators, and 2 of them involve male victims with male perpetrators. The first is Creatures Lie Here, which is set in the 1950s, and the character that is raped is, well, he's the son of, oh, there were two, and I forgot, because there's Dimitri and there's Celise. So in Creatures Lie Here, 2 of the patients in the criminal ward, so in Creatures Lie Here, it is set in the 1950s, and a reporter goes into a criminal ward to get a story about a 10-year-old who is accused of murdering his twin brother. He then discovers some of the other people in that ward that were famous in the city for different reasons at some point. One of them is a cannibal named Dimitri, and the other one is a prostitute or an ex-prostitute named Celise. Now, Dimitri, when he was young, he ran away from home and then just sort of lived as a vagabond, and during that time, he was raped by older homeless men. At one point, he killed them and ate them, and that's how he turned into he disassociated with humanity so much that he ate them as a power move, and then just didn't see people as people anymore. So that's how rape changed him. The other one in that story was Celise, and he was raised by a single mother who constantly had a revolving door of boyfriends coming in. And his mother, and eventually as he got older, he fought back and he stabbed one of them and killed them. And then his mother accused him, or said when, you know, the cops came for that murder, that he was a prostitute and this was a deal gone wrong or something like that. And Celise looked crazy to them, and so they put him in the psych ward. And you can see how those are used. Those are not huge parts of the stories. They're just parts of these characters that inspire how and why they are where they are and how they act. Because a lot of what I do with my writing is more the fallout of trauma, as opposed to what I do with writing is more the fallout of trauma or experiences, as opposed to focusing on making them happen. You'll see some similarities with a story that is tentatively called Kill Yourself. It had to do with Jarek and Seth, who are not behind me anymore, but that was the guy with the blue hair and the guy with the red hair. And the guy with the red hair was my character, Jarek. And he was a no, and he was also raised by a single mother with a revolving door of boyfriends because she had a borderline personality disorder, and one of the things that she constantly needed was affection and attention from men. And so those men were often not the greatest, and some of them sexually abused her child. Um, eventually, as Jarek grew up, he learned to use his sexuality, his even as like an 8-year-old, to control men so that he could take back the power after he was a victim. It is twisted. It's not accurate to rational thought, but it is logical for a victim who is trying to cope with his bad circumstances. Eventually, he became a prostitute because all he could do, really, and all he really believed in himself to be able to do is have sex, since he's been having sex since he was a single digit. But so that's how I have used rape in that story. In the book Cain and Abel, which is my Jeffrey Dahmer-inspired book, that book you more have people who are drugged and then Cain had sex with them because that was part of Jeffrey Dahmer's story. So I fictionalized that, where he would then go to clubs, drug people in the bathroom, have sex with them in the bathroom, and then leave. And then in Drugs and Candy, I have a character named Foster who eventually becomes a sex addict because he was first raped by his uncle along with his twin brother. And then as he got older, he compulsively had sex to the point that when he was sent off to boarding school, one of his female teachers forced herself on him and was like, well, nobody is going to believe you if you say that it was forced because you have such a reputation of a slut around here. So those are all variations of how I have used rape in my stories. Again, none of those are currently available. They will be eventually someday, to be totally judged and ripped apart for obvious reasons. At the end of the day, what am I really saying here? There are a bunch of different ways in which rape is used in stories. I don't think that there is anything that is out there that shouldn't be used in stories. Just know the reason why you're using it and make it make sense in the story, and try to give it the power and the respect that it deserves in the context in which you are giving it. And clearly, if you're writing it into an erotica, it's going to demand different attention than if you're doing it into a traumatic book. And if you're not interested in rape as erotica, then all you can do is avoid it, because it's a very popular trope, and you're never gonna stop it. No matter how much you complain about it, you're never gonna stop it. So just some people just like some things, and that is a choice. Well, those are my thoughts on this subject and some comparisons of books. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And if you have any experiences yourself with reading rape in books, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and or if you've written it in books, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on it being in books, period, or the experience of like picking it up or finding it in a book? Let me know everything you are thinking, want to share down below. All thoughts welcome. Just don't be a dick, please. That said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great weekend. After this type of video. Anyway, have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer.
For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die.
Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that?
To the left, plain black letters read along the wall, "You walked in the corridor."
once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine.
Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?